Okay, so for the last bit of this app, then what we need to do is um, use those four different types of object. So four classes define four different types of object, but we might have lots of student objects, lots of staff objects, lots of admin objects. We've just got to see how we can use them in our main app. So this is the UniApp code. So it's this one, UniApp 03. You'll notice here now, as compared with the previous version I had two files, okay, the database and the UniApp. Now I've got 6 files. I've got the database, the UniApp, and I've got these four classes, these 4 files representing a different class: person, user, student, and staff. They could, I mean, there's no in Python, there's no reason to have a separate file for each class. You could put them all in one class. We'll see an example of that. In fact, yeah, we will see an example of that next week. You could do that, but actually, it sort of makes sense to keep them separate. So, because then if you're working on the staff class, then you're only working on this one file. But that's sort of a matter of design choice as to whether you put all of your classes in, or related classes, in one file, or if you keep them in separate files. For the moment, I've kept them in separate files, but that's not it's not compulsory. Okay, so in order to run this, if you remember when we run this code, let me actually demonstrate that. I need to show you the window at the bottom. Yeah, when we run this code, if you remember, it goes through printing out all the users, first of all, up the top here. And then it asks you what group you want to send the message to, and then you tell it the message, and it will send the message to that group of users. So the first thing to do is to print out the users. And the way we do that is we loop over each user in that list of users. So each user is an object, but it could be a person object, it could be a staff object, it could be a student object, it could be a user object. We loop over, but so it doesn't actually, this user variable here can represent all of those 4 different types. It doesn't matter, we don't, it doesn't distinguish. Python doesn't distinguish here about what type of thing it is. It just has a variable called user, and then we can use our hasAttribute method, which I talked about last week, to decide what to print out. So first of all, we print out the name, because all of our objects have got a name in them. All of our classes have a name defined in them, and so all of our objects will have a name. So we just print out the user.name. And then we check to see if they've got a user ID. Obviously, that won't be true for the person, but it will be true for all the other classes. And if they've got a user ID, then we print that out, and then we print out the job. So these 2 lines of code are only going to be true for the staff. And if they've got a program, we print out the program. So this is only going to be true. These 2 lines are only going to be true for student objects. And then we look at the modules, and if it's got the modules list, so that would be true for staff or students, we loop over the modules in the list of modules stored in the user and print those out. So this code is actually doing quite a lot of stuff. It's able to check what sort of thing is stored inside. It doesn't even check what type of thing it is. We could do that. So there is another way of doing that. We could check, is the user a student object? Is it a staff object? That's possible, but here we haven't done that. We've just seen what is available inside that object. So if it's got a user ID, let's print it out. If it's got a job, let's print it out. If it's got a program, let's print it out. If it's got some modules, we'll print those out. So that's, there you go. It's true for user. So the user ID is true for user, staff, and student. The job true for staff objects. Program true for student objects, and the modules true for staff and student, but not person and user. So this code is able to handle all different kinds of objects and just print out the bits that it needs, or the bits that are available in that object. And the main loop now then can target modules as well as students. So this is a bit different from the previous version. The previous version, we didn't have modules. We didn't have the concept of modules. So because that would have been really complicated. If you remember the previous version, the database 02, there was just a tuple. I suppose we could have created a list of modules as part of the tuple, but we didn't do that. That's starting to get a bit complicated. So instead, what we've done now is we've got our objects, and now an object can store a list of modules. Okay, so this code, how does it work? It looks, as I said, it's slightly different to the one before, but it's still doing basically the same thing. It loops over the list of users. So I'm looking at this bit here where my mouse is for user and users. Having asked the user, the actual person using the app, what group they want and what message they want, it then loops over the list of users. There are too many users in this example. So having asked what group and what message we want, it loops over the list of users. First of all, it sets the send message to false, because the default position is you don't send a message to somebody unless they're in a group. So if the group is all, then send message is true, right? Like we want to send it to all people. If the group is students, then we just check whether it has program, an attribute, program attribute, and then we can send the message. If it's staff, we check whether it has a job attribute, send the message. And then if neither of those things are true, so we've checked whether it's the group is staff, students, all, or all. So those first three, if, elif, elif. If none of those things are true, that means that the group that we're looking at must be a module. Okay, so now we check it. So if the group is a module, so maybe, what did we have as modules? Can't remember. Let's find the database. Okay, there's a module. So something like UG1234, ST1234, PG1234. They're just, dummy names, obviously. If if the user object has modules stored inside it, well, we know then it must be a member of staff or a student, because only those have lists of modules attached to them or stored in the object. If that's true, and if the group that the app user has selected is in that list of modules, then we send the message. So send message. So we have this big if block that checks all the possibilities of which group the person is in, and if they're in the group that's been selected, then they will get a message sent to them. And finally, if send message is true, so that person has been found in that group, then, that user has been found in that group, then they get a message sent to them. So, which, as we know, it's just a simulation, so no message is actually sent. It just prints out a statement that the message has been sent to the user. Okay, so let's see that run. Actually, I think that's probably a good idea. So I started running, if you remember, it printed out all the usernames. So which group do I want to send to? If I say all, the message is hello everyone. Okay, and you can see it's been sent to all the users, Alice, Bobby, Chris. There's a reason I put them as alphabetical names. It's just so I can check that it's got to all the people. If it's to the students, let's say that's the last three, Eddie, Frank, and Jerry. Again, hi, it's sent to those three. If we select a module, so let's select, you can see one of the modules up here, UG1234. Hello group. Okay, this will go to anyone who's in UG1234. So who would that be? That would be staff 1, which is Chris. What else have we got? Student 1, which is Eddie. Well, student 2 is in UG1234, so that's Frank. I think that's it. Let's just check. So when I hit return, Chris, Eddie, Frank. Okay, so it's getting right. If you just, and by the way, if you put in a random bit of text here, it'll assume that's a module. So if I put in just some random text, when this if block is working, that isn't all, it's not students, it's not staff. So it's assuming we get to this else point where it assumes that anything that isn't those three words, staff, students, or all, it must be a module. And then it'll check whether that module, it'll look for all the users with modules, and it'll check whether random bit of text I've typed in is listed in their modules, so no messages get sent. Okay, put another random message in, and you'll see nothing gets sent. So it covers that option as well. Okay, so just to remind you then, this code will check, if the group is students, it'll check whether the user has the program attribute attached. If it's staff, it'll check whether the user has the job attribute attached, and if it's a module, it'll check whether they have modules attached. So that's true for staff and student, and send the message. Okay, so that's the Uni app. So that's the lecture on objects. If what we saw then is a motivation, why do we want to use these things? So last week we had what were called singleton classes. So you have a class that just defines one object, but actually that's quite an inefficient way when you might have in your code lots of things that essentially are doing the same thing. Okay, just as a car factory, you don't just design. You don't have a separate design for each car that's produced by the factory. You have one single design, and then lots and lots of that car are produced. We've seen the Home Hub, where we had a light class where we can produce lots of different types of light. So the ceiling light and the floor lamp and the, can't remember the other one. They were able to replace some of the classes that we had before. We saw how to use those objects and why that is a good idea, because it's reusing code. And then we saw the pizza. By having this pizza object, we can put stuff in the basket and then access everything that's in the basket by just looking at all the items in the basket and looking at all the details, so the price and the description for each item. And then finally, we've seen this Uni app where we can have different types of object, but multiple types of each thing. So we could have lots of person objects, we could have lots of user objects. We saw we had 2 staff objects, 3 student objects. Each one of those things is defined by a class, but then we can store different information in each object. So just to finish off, the most important point is the distinction between classes and objects is that classes is the design, and that tells you what will be stored in the object, and the object then each object can have different things in. So each different type of a student object defined by the student class can have different name, user ID, and so on. So it's a very efficient and very representative way of thinking about the real world. We can model the real world using our code to represent the things that we want to represent in our objects. So what are the important attributes in terms of our student population? Well, they're in terms of our app, we don't need to know any more details about the students other than their name and their user ID, because then we can send them a message. Okay, I hope you found that lecture interesting. I'm going to finish here, and I'll see you next week for GUIs, graphical user interfaces. We're going to use these to build actual apps.